Hello, this is Sheila Bender speaking with you from the studios at KPTZ. I'm talking this morning with Terry Persun, who is a writer, a local writer. He's written in many genres, poetry, fiction, nonfiction. He writes that he has loved writing for as long as he can remember and has been doing it and turning that love into a job. Today he writes novels, poetry, short stories, and nonfiction and wins awards and is written about in Publishers Weekly, Today's Librarian, and The Light Connection. He's got quite a presence in the award-winning arena, including an IPPY Award for one of his newest books. I'm going to be asking him a question right now that will lead him to telling us more about those awards. And that, Terry, is please, if you can, list your books for us and tell us something about the awards that they have won and perhaps what those awards are, who sponsors them, how you have submitted your work or your publisher perhaps has.
Oh, sure. I can try that. I've been publishing for a long time, and so some of these were from different publishers. I have several books that came out. The first one that I wrote was the one that was written up in Publishers Weekly as a hand-selling favorite, which was pretty cool.
What's that called?
A hand-selling favorite.
What does that term mean?
For Publishers Weekly, what they did was they went out to all the booksellers at the time and asked them what books they liked so much that they were trying to sell, as people came up to the counter.
To hand off
and hand sell them. And so my first novel was one of those, which was kind of cool for that year.
Very cool. What year was that? Do you remember?
Oh, my gosh, 1998, I believe.
Ancient history, but you're still winning awards.
I still try, at least. And then since then, I've won a couple of things. The IPPY Award, as you mentioned, there's an Independent Publishers Award from Independent Publisher Magazine at the time, and now it's an international thing. And that was for Sweet Song, which is a literary novel I wrote a few years ago, maybe 5-6 years ago. And let's see, then two of the books were Forward Magazine Book of the Year finalists. That was Wolf's Right, which is a mainstream novel, and Cathedral of Dreams, which is a science fiction.
So in all your genres, you've been winning.
Yeah, I tend to, I've won some chapbook awards for poetry. So
it doesn't feel old hat, though, does it, to keep winning awards?
No. As a matter of fact, I always worry and always concerned about it, especially because it costs the publisher some money
to submit your book.
To submit the books. And so they usually will only submit so many books a year, and so I have to be chosen for that. And then after that, it's only so many of my books, of course, will be looked at anyway. So you got to be careful. And
well, that's an interesting way to view winning, that it's a collaborative process between you and the publisher, and that you care that the publisher gets reward for having thought of your book to enter into a contest. I wonder, too, though, how it affects you as a writer. You're very prolific. Very, very, very prolific in my book. And I know every time a writer sits down to write something new, there's concern about, can I do it again? Or at least that's my experience. And I'm wondering what your experience is. And then as an award winner, the pressure might be even greater. How do you deal with that?
I think it's an interesting question because for me, writing is like meditation. So it's not really me who's writing, so I'm not consciously thinking about what I'm writing and why I'm writing it and all those things. Those things are talked about after the book is out. What I do when I write is I just sit down, get quiet, and let things pull through me. Now, I do work on a major project at a time. So if I'm working on a novel, I won't write 2 novels or anything like that so that the flow stays. But I write every day. So that's what being prolific is about. I don't believe in writer's block. To me, it's like asking someone if they've ever had speaking block. Have you ever found out that, in the grocery store and you see your friend, you can't talk? Of course you can talk. So writing is the same thing to me. It's part of what I do every day.
Do you have to do anything special to get to that quiet place?
No, I don't. I just I do it early in the morning, and I think that helps. So I often meditate before I go into my office to write. So I'm already quiet by the time I get there. I read what I wrote the day before that catches me up to the flow of the piece itself. I know authors who will read someone else's novel before they start writing because they want to get into the flow of the words and how it moves on the page.
And so you just sort of feel the moment when you're ready to stop reading and ready to start writing?
Right. Yeah. I don't tend to read in the morning. I go straight from meditation into my writing source. Yeah.
Do you ever worry about revision, or is there a switch in you after you finished a book and turn to revision? Is that a different kind of work?
That's a different kind of work. Yeah, but since I've been doing this for a long time, I've been the editor of several different magazines, and I can switch on the editor side and switch it off, which I think is one of the keys to writing a lot. Because if you're writing a lot and you have your editor sitting by you all the time telling you, oh, that sentence doesn't sound right, you tend to then slow down or stop altogether or rewrite that sentence 5 times. I believe in getting pieces written first because it's the story that I'm working on, the characters who I'm struggling with or wanting to learn more about. And once that story is done, I can go back and look at it as an editor and say, do I need to build more mood around this particular situation? Or does this happen in the right place? Are these characters interacting in a natural way? So those things start to crop up once you...
So a definite division between being the writer, Terry, and the editor, Terry.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting to me that meditation is an important tool for you. I know from my reading about writing and being in flow that when we reach that moment when the words are just coming, the world is kind of a timeless place, and we're not even thinking like ourselves, we are just allowing the words through us, that the two sides of our brain are actually working together, which is not often the case. Often our editorializing or judgmental or categorizing brain is at work in our culture anyway over time and interferes with what I call the design mind, the part that wants to use images and associative connections. A lot of us use writing like meditation to get our brains to be in flow, and it sounds to me that you're very easily gotten to that place of flow, whether it's in meditation or in writing. And so I'm wondering where meditation entered your life. Were you already a writer and then began meditating, and how you think the two work together?
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting question. I believe I've been writing for a long time, since I was in grade school and first started to read short stories. We had a little writing contest in 3rd grade, and doing that first short story for the writing contest just made it, wow. It made my life.
Did you win that contest, Terry?
No, I did not.
So
maybe that's why I kept pushing for these awards. And then I started meditating regularly, probably in my early 20s, I'd say. And that's when I fell into really enjoying meditation and that sort of thing.
Do you think that writing is for you? And you said it was a meditation. Is it very similar to when you're meditating without words, without writing words?
Actually, I love that state. So I find that being in that state, I can get there if I'm walking in the woods, if I'm talking to my family, if I'm working on a novel. There's something about being wholly there. I think, well, you know what I mean.
I know what you mean. Yes. I wish I could get there as easily.
and I try to do that as often as I can. And the more often that I'm wholly in that space, the more often I feel like I'm, forgive me for this, but one with the universe, and it's all right there.
I think a lot of us write for that very reason, because it can bring us there. Mm-hmm. And it's so opposite to how I remember myself in grade school, which was the crossing out person. Write a little bit, cross it out, really dark and with great vigilance, and then start again and then get frustrated. And that's not a very good place to write from. So I think it's a good lesson that you're repeating for us about letting it flow, being at one, not judging, being interested. Like you say, you're interested to know what's happening with your characters.
Right. Yeah. Oh, I grew up in the country, and so I've always been in nature a lot. And my dad's Indian, so we've just always been around that sense of being part of everything.
When you say Indian, you mean Native American? Or
Native American, yeah.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. What tribe?
Cherokee, yeah.
Thank you. So it's been a part of his outlook that you also
exactly,
grew up with,
yeah.
So I would like for you, if you don't mind, to take some time to read some passages and poetry from your books, and maybe you could I see you have 3 of them here with you today. Could just very briefly, after you say the title, tell us the genre and what award it won, if it won an award, and why you're reading the selection you are. So I'll turn this over to you for the next minutes while you read to us so we can get some of the flavor of your dexterity with the genres.
Yeah, everything's a little different to me. So I can tell you a little story real quick about Sweet Song, which I'll read from first, and what we've already been talking about. I was working on Sweet Song in my office, just writing one morning. Nobody comes to my office while I'm working, of course. The door's closed. And something was happening, and my wife needed to get a hold of me. And so she knocked twice, she said she knocked twice. She stepped into the door. I didn't know who she was in that moment, and I looked up, and she saw that I had no idea who she was or what was going on. And all she did was say, "I'm sorry," and left. Later on, after I was done writing for that day, she came in and said, or we talked, and she said, this was the first time I've ever really seen you in that state where you were working. And that's how I get when I write the real stuff. So I'll read from Sweet Song. It's a literary novel. It takes place right after the Civil War. My main character is mulatto, and at first he meets up, once he leaves the farm where his dad is a slave, he meets up with other blacks who have been freed just recently, and they're wandering around and doesn't know whether he's white or black because he's a mulatto. And this is just a little bit about their interaction and how things changed one night. So I'll read maybe a page and a half or so from this. They were a noisy bunch while they were happy, telling stories as they cooked and ate. Perhaps it was the lowering of the sun, the filling of their stomachs, or only that they ran out of happy stories. But as darkness approached, a depressing and sorrowful tone came over their conversations. "The war killed my brothers and most of me cousins." "Right aside me," Jesse said. "I seed a hole the size of my thumb push into his forehead, then blood flowed out matching his heartbeat. I remember thinking he was scared because of how fast the pushin' blood pushed out." Jesse shook his head as if he were trying to shake the memory from himself. "The loudness of war make you deaf to music. You ears just ring like the after sound of a church bell, but war ain't no church except that it send more people to heaven." After Jesse fell silent, Buddy said that he lost a brother too, but I weren't there to see it. "You don't know much about loss like that, do you?" Cracker Jack said to Leon. Bob gave Cracker Jack a cold, hard stare. "His pappy shot for running. And we don't know why exactly," Cracker Jack said. "Maybe we don't want to know," Jesse said. But Bob poked at the fire and sparks burst into the air. "Maybe it's not our business." "We've been traveling together. Don't that make it our business?" Cracker Jack said. Leon kept quiet, and eventually Big Josh spoke up. "We ain't been honest neither." Cracker Jack shot him a mean look, and the others paused long enough for Leon to realize he didn't know them as well as he had thought. Leon ignored them, staring into the fire as though he hadn't heard Big Josh at all. Leon's heartbeat quickened. He heard something rustle a short distance away in the woods. His burlap bag was drying near where he hid his book, his knife, and his revolver. He adjusted his legs, which were getting sore from being in the same position for a long time. Big Josh stood up and kicked stones and dirt onto the fire, making it spit sparks into the darkness. "Sit down, Josh," Jesse said. "I killed that man, and you all knows it. We lyin' all the time. We lyin' to ourselves, making up stories and lives we wanted, not the ones we got." Big Josh peered down at Leon. "Boy, we all runnin'." "That's it," Cracker Jack said. He stood up now, and the restlessness of the others became an active and wild animal rummaging through their camp. "I not stoppin'," Big Josh said. "Damn God damn it," Bob said under his breath. "I hated that man. He treat me bad, and when his head was under the wagon hub, I kick it off its post. I seed his ears squirt blood, and one eye push out and land in the dirt. I run and not stop running until I run into these criminals." "Criminals?" Cracker Jack didn't like the sound of that. "Don't never hate a man, boy, 'cause sure enough you'll kill him." Big Josh finished speaking, then nodded toward Cracker Jack, who had never finished his assault. Cracker Jack waited for Josh to sit and then glanced around. "I killed 7 men." Leon slid back from the fire. He glanced to judge how close he sat from his revolver. "They all soldiers," Cracker Jack pounded his own chest. "I killed them 'cause they killed my family. It was right that I killed them." Big Josh continued to stare at the man, and Cracker Jack spit. "I so filled with noise and anger and fear." He closed his eyes, and when he spoke again he whispered, "I start loading and shooting at anybody I sees." He lowered his head and walked out of the camp, and Bob poked Leon with a toe. When Leon jumped, Bob whispered, "He shoot his own son." After a moment, Bob said, "You know, boy, what you try to hide is always there. It never go away. Sooner or later, it boil up and make a blister everyone can see." So anyway, that's a little long.
Well, thank you, Terry, but your dialogue is amazing. It brings me right to an era, a gender, a setting that is far, far, I'm sure, from your office. So I totally understand how you might not recognize your wife as she opened the door when you were at work. You must have been really back there in what, the
1880 something, I believe it took place, yeah.
And where is this geographically?
Geographically, it's in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, where I grew up.
I see.
Or in that area.
Yeah,
so it was
but
up
many
along
years before your birth.
Yes, many years before my birth.
So it's quite a transporting thing for the reader, a listener, but also obviously for you, the writer. So we'll switch tones now and hear a piece of your poetry.
Sure, I can do a poem or two. I write poetry mostly at night, but I love writing poetry.
Do you know why you do it at night mostly?
Yeah, I think I've tried to figure all these things out, and who knows if it's right, but in the evening, after the whole world's been at me, I have more to pull from. And so for poetry, I'm always looking for a different image, as you know, or a word that I may not have flowed into the same way. I find it just...
Because it was there for you during the day? It came to you from somebody or
somewhere else. From something that happened.
Yeah. You know, what it's making me think of is Charles Baudelaire has a famous poem at 1 o'clock in the morning. He was the person who introduced prose poetry to Western culture, he was from the West, and he just made it famous in France, and then it spread. And he's basically having a tantrum at the world, and he's reciting his day and then praying to be a better person than those he came up against during the day.
Great.
So I think he was a soul brother with you about writing poetry at the end of the day. So let's hear something.
Sure. I have a real short poem, and then I have a little bit longer one, but not too bad. So this one I like a lot. It just reminds me of what it's about. It's called Progress. They fixed the highway near Old Oak Road. Now when you reach the ridge on Bastion Hill, you can't see the old oak.
So it makes us question what fixed means.
Exactly. Yeah. And what are we doing? I'm always drawn by the fact that most of the developments are called just that. Old oak development, and there's no oak anywhere,
right. And they don't
birch tree.
They don't be honest and say fixed in quotes.
Exactly.
Old oak.
So, and I've written a bunch of poems about writing poetry, and I don't typically read one of those, but I'm going to do that this time.
Well, we are in conversation about writing and the writing life.
And why not?
Thank you.
Exactly. So this is called writing poetry. I shuffle back and forth to the kitchen whenever I want coffee. No one lives with me anymore. They've all left or died. When I look back into the room where I sit with my desk lamp and computer and paper, it looks as though everything is inside a dark tunnel with a slight glow from a single bulb. How many years, I wonder, have I sat at that desk and written or rewritten, not knowing who might or might not read my words, who might or might not care about what my thoughts focused on or landed near. I scratch my rough beard of 3 days and pour another cup of coffee before I wander back into that dark tunnel to listen, to smell, to feel what else is inside me scrambling to get out.
Lovely. And so sobering, just like I suppose coffee's supposed to be.
I know, yeah, we hope so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's a lovely meditation. So let's turn to the third book that you brought, which you referred to earlier as just science fiction. And what I know of the genre is that there's a lot of freedom in that genre to raise important issues of our very times in the guise of this might be in the future. But those of us sensitive to reading know that we're talking about humanity as we understand it. So you might have a comment on that and then perhaps tell us something about the book and give us a little sample.
Yeah, absolutely. I write science fiction. I've written science fiction for years and years, mostly short stories that have been published in the past. And then when I started writing literary novels, I stopped writing science fiction as much. But partly because my regular job is writing science and technology articles for magazines.
You have time for a regular job?
Oh, yeah. I have time to make a living. So because of that, I was doing all that technical writing there and on studying all the robotics and everything else. I've written for all kinds of people. Now that I've gotten back into working on longer pieces with, like you said, with my writing, the technology, once it enters, takes on a new role. And so I can question through the technology. So briefly, this novel, it's called Revision 7 DNA. And it's about the move that we're making toward robotics and getting more and more human-like, which is what we're trying to do, give them emotion, let them do all these other things. And so I wanted to explore that a little bit. And one of the subjects that I explore along with it, I also have time travel in this book. So these robots are coming back in time. And I did that because the robots feel as though they're closer to God than humans are, because the robots can move back and forth in time, but we can't. So they automatically think that they're the next evolution. I do a funny thing with the names in this novel. I know this all sounds complicated, but it's not once you read it. Several of the characters have more than one name because of their change. I have two short sections from different places. One is the guy who's building this initial robot before the time machine robots. This is just a little bit ahead of the future we have now, not too far. And he's going to add the DNA to the robot. He's already worked all the circuitry up, and so he's wanting to put this next revision in. And he's doing it because he's got the DNA from his dead son. So Dr. Klein lowered his hand and set the tube on the bench. Many questions, he said. I called it material so that no one would try to guess what it was. And it doesn't only hold DNA inside a reagent. His eyes went to the tube. This is a small part of Fenimore's brain. Who's Fenimore? The robot said. My son. But I am Fenny. That is the shortened name for Fenimore. That is who I am. Fenny is only part of Fenimore. It's my way of reminding myself every day that Fenimore will return to me. Fenny's voice lowered to a near whisper. You never saw me as whole. You'll never understand. You'll understand once this engages. This will be the best thing that ever happened to you. It'll go beyond what you already feel, what you understand as yourself. This, he asserted, will make you feel real. Earlier, you said you'd never been happier. Well, you soon will be. Dr. Klein motioned for Fenny to come closer. I won't be me any longer, though, will I? Fenny questioned. You'll be better. More, the doctor said. So I do this with the robot as he's developing to kind of get at the subject that I feel we do this to ourselves and to the rest of the world all the time. Because what we're always up to is trying to learn the next thing and develop to the next piece. And when we do that, and if we're too hard on ourselves, it's always because we're not good enough yet. We're not whole. So this other little piece, very short, again, it's later in the book where the main character's wife was kidnapped by the future robots. So these are the future robots, and she's having this conversation with one of them. And they're talking about neural grid circuitry because she said, we're using neural grid circuitry. He turned his head toward her and lowered his arm. Your robots don't use it at the moment, but they will in another 7 years. They'll all have to so that they can simulate certain emotions, upgrades that don't sound so mechanical, so cold. Humans get uncomfortable with how cold their slaves sound when talking. It's your first big mistake, believe me. We use neural grid circuitry now, Mavra said. You use neural grids on their own, and only in computers, not interfaced completely, not multiplexed, and then interconnected to digital, and definitely not inside a robotic structure. You have no idea what will happen, the robot said, but it needs to stop there. You humans are always trying to make something better, but you only make it different, and often that makes it worse. I won't make that mistake. We don't want to be you. We're already better. We're the next era of life on Earth. We're closer to God than you are capable of being. How do you mean? Mavra said. The whole idea of God to her was a human belief based on the living. What concept of God could he have? The robot shook his head and spoke slowly, as though he wanted it to sink in. We can do what you cannot do. Travel through time, she said. The robot's face created a twisted smile, an unnatural expression of delight. Humans are stuck where they are in more ways than one. So
Thank you, Terry. People can visit your website.
Right.
And can you tell us the address of that?
Oh, sure. It's just terrypersun.com.
Persun.
S-U-N,
Terrypersun.
Yes.
.com. There's a lot to keep track of here, and you've certainly made my mind absorb quite a lot of history, quite a lot of poetry, and quite a lot of imagining of the future. Thank you so much for coming in and telling us about your process in writing. My wish for you is, of course, to be able to continue.